Alright guys, welcome back. GM Light here. Today we're going to be talking about the 2019 Pet Sematary remake. I have a lot of thoughts on this one. I really like this remake, but for some reason I haven't been able to pinpoint it until I think recently why. It feels like there's something missing with it. As much as I've always liked it, it's always felt like there's been some kind of disconnect there. I couldn't quite pinpoint why. I don't fully love it and fully get on board with it, and although I really do like it and I think it's almost great, it's not quite there. And we'll get into it. First with the plot. Pet Sematary 2019 pretty much follows the same plot as the original. Dr. Lewis Creed and his wife Rachel relocate from Boston to rural Maine with their two young children. The couple soon discover a mysterious burial ground hidden deep in the woods near their new home. When tragedy strikes, Lewis turns to his neighbor Judd Crandall, setting off a perilous chain reaction that unleashes an unspeakable evil with horrific consequences. Like I mentioned, at the center of it, I really do like this remake. It feels like it takes the material very seriously and it sets up everything perfectly. The set design's amazing, everything about how they build up the Pet Sematary, the environment, the feelings surrounding it. They treat it with weight, gravity that it deserves. All the actors are pretty much perfect. They cast every perfect modern day actor that could fit these roles, and they do it right. I love Jason Clarke as Lewis Creed, and getting John Lithgow to be Judd Crandall, that's awesome. It's also too, it seems like it does want to tap into talking about mortality a little bit more in this movie. Towards the beginning they slow down, they kind of talk about their perceptions of it. It's something that they gloss over a little bit in the original movie, and it's something that I'm glad that they spend a little more time talking about in this movie. The only problem with that is it feels a little bit half-baked because they don't fully commit to those ideas, and that's kind of what I've pinpointed to be my big disconnect with this movie. It makes the themes work really well from the original, but the thing is, kind of what I figured out with this movie is it feels like it's more ambitious than the original movie, but my issue with that is that since it's the same runtime as the original movie, the ideas are a little bit more surface level and then they can't fully develop. This movie kind of needed some more time to breathe. I wish it was more like 2 hours or something so that they could fully develop these ideas that they were going for. I feel like I have a better context for these ideas since I read the book. I could see a lot more what they were going for having read the book, but you shouldn't need to read the book in order to really grasp and understand the movie and what the movie's going for. So I do see that as kind of a huge mistake on the movie's part. Whereas the original was a lot more concise and it didn't overreach for things that it couldn't fully explain or tackle. This one kind of goes for a lot of different things. It gets more into lore. It wants to tap into talking about mortality, all these other things. But since it has its hand in so many different cookie jars, it can only go surface level on all these concepts and ideas because, like I said, it's the same runtime as the original. And that makes it a little bit less focused. It makes it a little bit less clear what the movie's going for and what it's trying to hammer home. That kind of takes away from stuff like Victor Pascal, who has a much more limited presence in this movie than he does in the original. And I just think that they could have used more time to fully execute these ideas, especially too with Lewis's wife, her fear of death. That's a big, prominent kind of point of contention in the book, and it seemed like it was something that they really wanted to tackle in this movie, but they didn't fully go through with it, and you don't fully get what her bugaboo kind of is besides the stuff with Zelda. But since they didn't fully develop it, it just kind of falls a little bit flat. I don't think it's all bad though with that type of stuff, because I am glad that they try to go into the lore a little bit more. We get a bit more of an explanation as to what's going on with this burial ground, and that stuff is interesting. It serves to explain more about what's going on in the rules and the background with this whole thing. And it's cool to just get such a solid retelling of this story, taken very seriously with great actors, a very polished look. It's just something that I'm not going to complain about, and for the most part I really do like it. It's just that problem that I have that I mentioned with the fact that it goes for too many things that it can't fully execute. I'm glad too, another thing that they did is that they go for kind of a twist on the story. If you don't want to know the twist, leave now, but it's pretty cool that they decided to have Ellie be the one who gets hit by the truck instead of Gage instead. That completely changes the dynamic of the family, the story, the tragedy. It's just a very vital point in the book where it completely deviates, and it creates for different dynamics and situations that aren't in that original movie and aren't even in that original book. And what I mean by that is since you have the older child being the one who died and is brought back and resurrected, instead of having a toddler, you actually get a little girl who can articulate. You get some more interesting things out of that because she actually speaks to Lewis. You get a bit more of a perspective, which is something that you didn't really get in the original because Gage is a toddler. He could barely talk. I wish that she wasn't too overacted. I think that they lean a little bit too much into that with this, but it's still cool to see. It adds something very different, and when you're gonna remake something, you do want to do something different, and this is a huge twist on the original story and completely changes everything. Also too, playing into that aspect that the older child died, that means that when things go down, when the child turns and becomes evil and starts killing, you have a more menacing presence. I really like the look with the animal mask. That adds a cool kind of layer to it that also harkens back to that Pet Sematary. It was just a very fresh and bold idea, and I'm glad that they really stuck with that. I wish that they didn't show that in the trailer because that was fucking stupid to do, but whatever, that was 4 years ago. Can't complain too much about it. Something too that I felt like could have added an interesting aspect to the story in the original that we don't really get is that in this version we get a full family reunion with the child who's brought back to life, and they do take a moment to kind of marinate in those feelings. In the original, Rachel comes home, Gage is alive, and she pretty much dies and that's it. But in this one, Rachel comes home with Gage. You actually get that full family reunion, that reaction. You get to see everything happen with that, and I thought that that made for a nice touch to the movie. And the scenes that that created make you feel very complicated emotions along with the characters, so that was very effective. My problem though is that after that scene, it kind of rushes to the end a lot, and I wish that they took a little bit more time to breathe. It feels like as soon as Rachel is brought home and she's reintroduced to Ellie as a zombie, almost instantly you get that whiplash of Ellie's evil and she goes after her and she's trying to kill her. So I wish that they took more time to develop that and build up to it instead of just kind of having that snag from beginning to end. Especially too because emotionally there's just so much at stake there that I wish that they did take more time with that. And then on top of that, I don't know exactly how I feel about this version of the ending. I think it's interesting, but I don't like the idea that they take it out of Lewis's hands. Because of that, it loses a little bit of its impact. Especially to the shot at the end of the original of Lewis carrying Rachel back to the Pet Sematary. That shot just really sticks in my mind. It's a real standout in that movie, and I don't think that they replaced it with something that was as interesting as that original ending. Him actually just continually not accepting that he can't bring his family back, he can't change things, and that his inability to accept things is just going to reap more damage to his family and his life. I think that that's more powerful, and the fact that Ellie's basically solely responsible for all the tragedy at the end of this movie, it just doesn't fully work for me as nearly as well as that original. I think that there's a kernel of an interesting idea in the family all being brought back. It's a cool shot at the end of the movie, but I think the fact that it's not a conscious decision from the living takes away from the impact of that scene, and then it just doesn't work as well for me because of that. The fact that they do that doesn't really add anything interesting to the conversation for me. It doesn't feel like an ending that I want to talk about or discuss as much as the original, which I feel like there's a lot of layers to talk about there. With this one, there really isn't, the whole engagement's being brought by an evil kid that's basically demonically possessed, and then making the rest of her family demonically possessed. It takes any of the conscious decision making out of it, so it just isn't as good, in my opinion. But overall, this remake, I think it's very slick. I really like the acting and everything. It's a very solid remake that takes the material seriously, and I very much enjoy it. In no way do I think that this is a movie that's not interesting to watch. I do very much like it. I very much enjoy it. There's just a little bit of a disconnect for me that bars me from thinking that it's a great remake. It would probably be in my top list of remakes, but I'd have to see how I feel about other ones before I really make that call. Because at the core of this story, it's a very effective story. I really love it. I'm never not gonna love it. But that's my opinion on the Pet Sematary remake, Pet Sematary 2019. Let me know your guys' opinion in the comments. I'd love to hear. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.